Hi. I've been asked to record another story, so I'm going to record my favourite story. It's longer than the one yesterday. It comes from Iceland. Long ago, in that land of fire and ice, there lived a group of people on a small island just off the coast of Iceland itself. And the winters there were long and hard and harsh, and the sea between the small island and Iceland itself would freeze over and become treacherous to cross. These people, they lived in stone huts with turf roofs, and they would have a central fire, which was their light, their heat, their place to cook, and the place to gather in the evenings to chat and tell stories. Because of this long winter, they would gather together as a group and they would have a mid-winter celebration. They would take along instruments and food and ale, and they would sit and eat and drink, and then some people would get up and play instruments, and they would sing, and people would get up and dance, and they would drink some more and eat some more and chat some more and dance and sing songs and drink and dance and sing songs and drink and sing and drink and sing and drink. While this was going on, back in each of their stone huts, their fires were going out one after the other. Unbeknown to them, all the fires went out as they slept off their celebration. When they awoke in the morning, they were cold. They were so cold, for there was no fire. They went back to their huts and they were icy cold. And then they started to chat amongst themselves, and they realised that none of them could remember how to light a fire. It had been so long. And someone had a vague idea of how to light a fire, but they couldn't get to the things that they needed, for it was trapped in ice and snow. They couldn't get access to anything that they needed. They realised, in these conditions for a long winter that had to carry on, that they wouldn't survive for very long. They talked amongst themselves and said, someone needs to go to the mainland. They need to cross the frozen sea and bring back fire to the island for us to survive. A strapping young man stepped forward and said, I'll take that journey. And he turned to his sister and he said, Sister, come with me. And she stepped forward. I'll join you, brother, she said. And then their younger brother, he stepped forward and said, I want to come too. And the three of them looked across to their mother and father. And the mother and father nodded. They knew these children were taught the ways of nature, of the weather, of the land, of the sea. They knew these children were up for this task, for this journey. Of course, they hadn't partaked in the alcohol in the evening. So they began to get themselves ready. They packed their knapsack full of dried fish and water and bits and pieces. They put on their heavy fur salopettes and their heavy thick fur boots and their heavy thick fur-lined parkas with hoods. And these parkas were beautiful. They were embroidered on the cuffs with red and yellow and green thread, and around the collar, around the hood, red and green and yellow thread that their grandmother had done. Beautiful. Splashed on the front was the dried blood from the creatures that they'd killed earlier in the year, the seals and the seabirds and the fish, to dry out for their food for the winter. When they were ready, they put on their knapsacks. They hugged their mother and father and grandmother and kissed them goodbye. And the whole group of villagers watched them as they went onto that little shingle spit of a beach, and they began to step out onto the frozen sea, not knowing what the future had for them crossing that frozen sea. It was a long journey. The first day, the rain began to fall, and it began to sting their face It wasn't the warm rain that we have in many climates. This rain stung when it hit your face. It was so cold. They pulled up their hoods a bit more, and on they walked. And the weather began to change. It began to rain even more, weakening the ice, making it unstable. They continued to walk across that frozen sea, and then the oldest could see in the distance the thing that he dreaded. There was a black twinkle, a chinking across. It was the sea. It wasn't frozen all the way across. They got to the gap where it was, and they could see that deep, dark sea floating past. But the oldest, he looked and he thought, I can jump that. And he just took a run and a jump, and he leapt across without even thinking, and he was across safely. His sister, she stepped up. She thought a bit more about things. She looked, she measured that distance. She worked out what she could do within herself. She took a run and a jump, and she leapt across, and she got across safely. And the youngest, he stepped forward and he looked. I can't do this. I can't do this, brother, sister, I can't. This is too much for me to jump. Go back home, said his brother and sister. Go back home to mother and father. We'll carry on. We'll bring fire back in a few days. And they turned and they began to walk away. And the boy, well, he stepped to walk away, and then he stopped. And he turned and he looked as he saw the back of his brother and sister walking away. And for a moment, he wondered, will I ever see them again? And then, well, he thought to go back home. But, you know, he was a determined little boy, young boy. And he decided to walk along that ice to see if he could find a gap that was a narrower gap, or something that he could jump perhaps. And he walked along, and he walked along that edge as that deep, dark, black sea flowed past him. And he was walking along, trying to find somewhere to leap across. And suddenly there was a crack, and the ice on which he was standing broke away from the ice, and the sea just took him. And he no longer had control of the situation. The sea just took that piece of ice that he was standing on, and it just took it along and along and along. And the boy didn't panic. He just hunkered down on that piece of ice and waited for an opportunity. Sure enough, eventually, that small piece of ice bumped into a large landmass of ice, and he leapt off onto his hands and knees, and he looked up and then froze. Very, very slowly, he got up to his full height, barely moving, not shifting his gaze for one moment. For there, in the distance, not far, was a mother polar bear with her 2 cubs. And the boy knew that if a mother bear was with her cubs, this could be dangerous, very dangerous, because a mother polar bear will protect her cubs from everything and anything. The bear sniffed the air and caught the scent of the boy, and the bear began to walk towards the boy. The boy stood completely still, not moving at all. The bear got to him and sniffed the boy. And then the bear turned to walk away and looked at the boy. And the boy instinctively knew that he was to follow the polar bear. So he followed the mother bear. And the 2 cubs joined them. And they went to a snow cave where the bear had her lair. And they hunkered in that snow cave, the mother polar bear, the 2 cubs and the boy, and they all hunkered together to keep each other warm, for now nightfall was coming when it got bitterly, bitterly cold. They hunkered into each other and they kept each other warm. And the mother, well, she fed her cubs her milk. And then she fed the boy her milk. And they slept like that for the night. The next morning, the mother bear got out of the snow cave, and the boy instinctively followed her. She dropped her shoulder, and the boy knew he was to climb on, and he climbed on her back, And she wriggled and wriggled, and the boy fell off. So they went back into the snow cave. And they hunkered down again for a cold day and a long cold night, hunkering together to keep each other warm. The mother, she fed her cubs the milk, and she fed the boy her milk. The next morning, the same thing. She got up, the boy followed. He climbed on her back. She wriggled and wriggled and wriggled, and once again he fell off. A third night together. The third morning they got up. The bear stepped outside, dropped her shoulder. The boy climbed on. He held on tightly. She wriggled and wriggled and wriggled and wriggled and wriggled and wriggled. And the boy held on. It was time. The bear, with the boy on her back, she walked towards the edge of the pack ice and gently put herself into the sea with the boy on the back, and then she began to swim. Meanwhile, on that island, the villagers were gathered together, looking out on the horizon to see if they could see the three of them returning with fire. They were scanning the horizon, and one of the villagers looked, and in the distance saw the bear coming. A bear's coming to the island! A bear's coming to the island! The bear has got one of the children on its back! The bear has got the little boy on its back! He called out, and all the villagers looked, and the bear came to the edge of the island and got out onto that little spit of the beach, and she climbed and the boy jumped off. And he said, "Father, Father, we must get a pail of warm milk for the bear." And Father went to his barn and he milked his finest goat into an oaken pail with hot, fresh milk and took it down to the bear, and the bear lapped up all that fresh milk. And then the father said, "We must give her food for her cubs." And the father took his 2 finest goats and he slaughtered them, tied them together with rope, and put them over the head of the mother bear for her to take back to her cubs. The mother bear entered the sea once again, and she began to swim away, and for a moment she turned and she looked as if to say thank you, and she carried on swimming back to where her cubs were. The villagers were all watching. They were watching this bear swim away in the distance and wondering about this wonderful thing that they'd just witnessed. And one of the villagers began to scan the horizon once again in the other direction, and they saw a star. They said, "There's a star. Look at the star in the sky. It's not high up like it should be. It's just above the horizon. And the star, well, it began to change shape and colour. It went from white to yellow to orange to red, and it grew larger. Of course, it was fire. There was a longboat coming from the mainland. The ice had broken up enough, the sea had unfrozen enough that this longboat could make its way across the sea to the island. It was the brother and the sister. They were bringing fire back to the island. They docked onto the beach and brought the fire, and they distributed the fire so they could all light the fires in their huts and keep themselves warm to survive this long, cold winter. The children hugged their mother and father. The mother and father and the grandmother, they hugged and they kissed in delight of seeing each other once again. They'd survived a treacherous journey. They had fire to keep them warm, they had food and they had drink, and they had song and they had stories, and they had each other to survive the long winter. And you know, it is said that those villagers on that island, those islanders, well, they never ever let their fires go out ever again. And that's an Icelandic folk tale. Thank you.